Hey, what's up, Gorehounds? So I've been tagged by Shariah Spectrophilia for the horror movie tag, and I'm filming in the daytime for once. And so I've got 13 questions that I'm going to answer about horror movies for you guys. So question number one, what is your favorite horror movie? I think I've answered this before in other videos, but for those who don't know, my favorite horror film of all time is John Carpenter's 1978 Halloween for a variety of reasons. It's got a really creepy score written by Carpenter himself. It's got a really dark and creepy atmosphere. It's got a very sinister boogeyman that I don't think has been ever matched for just his sheer level of creepiness. And it's just a classic horror film. There's a reason they show it on horror movie AMC all the time. It's a really great film. Of course, if you're a horror movie fan, you've almost definitely seen it. If you haven't seen it, then don't know where you've been, but yeah, if you haven't seen Halloween, definitely see it. And question number two, who is your favorite Scream Queen? Well, it should surprise absolutely no one that because my favorite horror film is Halloween, my favorite Scream Queen is Jamie Lee Curtis. And yeah, she's the one who gets stalked by Michael Myers. For those of you who don't know, you should all know that. And yeah, she the reason she's my favorite is just because she's very much like a human being. She reacts to situations very realistically. Unlike some earlier films like Psycho, where I thought it was very well directed, but the actors acted like actors. They were very stereotypical for the sort of 50s, 60s time period, and they didn't feel like real people to me because of that. Also, Jamie Lee's acting in Halloween and other slasher horror films, she feels like a real person, unlike a lot of modern films where they just tend to get stars for the horror films that are only there to sort of boost their credibility for other roles. They don't really care about the film. I've never felt that with Jamie Lee's performances. For that reason, she's my favorite Scream Queen. What type of horror film do you like? Primarily slasher films like Friday the 13th, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Halloween, films like that. I do also like supernatural horror films to an extent, particularly the classics like films like Rosemary's Baby, Poltergeist, and The Exorcist. I'm huge fans of those. And yeah, also, there's been a few fairly decent modern supernatural horror films that I've liked, such as Insidious and also the first Paranormal Activity. So I like a pretty wide variety of horror films, everything from the complete terror maniac brandishing a chainsaw on your face type horror to the more supernatural, ethereal, and harder to describe type horror. I like a lot of different horror films. But the fourth question says, what type of horror films do you not like? I don't like horror films that are excessively gory just for the sake of being so. A good example of this, although I enjoyed it at the time as a kid, looking back on it, I don't think it's a very good film, is 2005's Hostel. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's a pretty mindless film. It's just about torture, blood, and guts. And it's done well for what it is. I just don't really like what it is. And the other type of film I don't really like is the found footage film where nothing really happens. Some found footage films can be well done because they actually carry a cohesive plot and a narrative and things flow in a structural manner as they should. But films like the Blair Witch Project, which I was really excited to see, and when I finally saw it, I was just disappointed by it because nothing really happened. There was some suspense at points, but nothing ever came of it, and very quickly, even before the movie was over, I got tired of watching it, realizing that probably nothing was going to happen, and my guess was right. So, yeah, films that are overly gory just for the sake of being gory, I don't like those, and films that don't have enough happening. It's sort of the two extremes. You need to have somewhere in the middle where you have suspense and atmosphere meeting gore and terror. If you come right in the middle there, you can make your perfect horror film, like Halloween. Anyway, if I were a victim in any horror movie, which would it be? Probably somewhere in the Friday the 13th series I would like to be, just because the kills in that movie tend to be very creative, and the victims tend to be hilariously unaware of the situations going on around them. For that reason, I don't find Friday the 13th very scary, but I do find it massively entertaining. And for that reason, it is one of my favorite horror franchises out there. So yeah, I'd like to be a victim in Friday the 13th. My favorite horror villain. Probably have to go with Jason from Friday the 13th, just because he's a hulking badass. He has the very creative kills, as I've already said, and he's the reason he's my favorite character is because although Friday the 13th isn't my favorite franchise, um, Jason is such a popular horror character or boogeyman that um, fans just want to see him. And that's been proven in the past when they've made films like Jason X, where it's literally Jason in space. Sounds like a completely stupid, retarded idea, and it is, but fans still went to see it, thus proving that all they want to see is Jason, because Jason's such a popular character. So as far as characters go, he's my favorite horror movie villain. Question number 7 says, what is the worst horror movie villain? Some might not consider this a horror movie, but I think it was the first film in the series was meant to be somewhat serious. So I'm going to go with The Leprechaun from the movie Leprechaun. If you haven't seen it, I don't recommend it. It kind of tries to be darkly humorous and at the same time tries to be sort of horrific. It's actually one of the first films Jennifer Aniston appeared in, but that's not a reason to go see it. It's honestly terrible. And the Leprechaun is played by a midget, and he just cracks wise in a stupid fake Irish accent all the time, and it just sounds really bad. So yeah, Leprechaun. The Leprechaun is my least favorite horror movie villain for that reason. Worst horror film I've ever seen. Okay. I could go on and on and on and on about this, and I might have to make a few other videos about terrible horror films I've seen, because thus far I've only tended to review films that I've really liked. But the worst horror film I've seen that comes to mind is a film called Sick, which is SICK, stands for Serially Insane Clown Killer. And it is absolutely terrible. The acting is terrible, the writing is terrible, the directing is inept. The situations are inane and stupid and hard to buy as a viewer. And this is just a slasher movie where a clown goes around in a forest killing people and eating them. It's not anything that should have been hard to film or hard for the creators to wrap their brains around. But they failed so badly that it's almost worth seeing just for a few laughs to see how badly they fucked it up, because they really did. So yeah, again, that's Sick, stands for Serially Insane Clown Killer. Or there's an alternative title that I believe they used in the UK, which is Grim Weekend. Either way, it's absolutely horrible movie, and if you like horrible movies, you might want to see it, or maybe not. What is the most overrated horror film? As much as I enjoyed it, I feel that Poltergeist was a very overrated movie. The main reason for this is because the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is directed by Tobe Hooper, and that's one of my favorite films of all time. Tobe Hooper also supposedly directed Poltergeist, so I was very looking forward to seeing it when I first heard that it was the same guy who directed one of my favorite movies. Problem was, with Poltergeist, Steven Spielberg took over a lot of the creative stuff. He wrote a lot of it, he did a lot, and he had too much influence, I feel, on the film, because Poltergeist ends up feeling not very scary because it feels more like a family popcorn movie with just a few elements added in there so it could be marketed as horror. And it's not a bad movie. It's well done in its own right. It just feels that because of Spielberg's influence, it was too childish, and therefore it didn't have any scaring power for me. I wasn't scared by it at all. Whereas everyone seems to consider it a terrifying classic. For that reason, I believe it's a very overrated horror film. Though a good one, just overrated in the sense that people believe it's scary, which I don't. Most underrated horror film. I'm gonna have to think about this. I think one of the most underrated horror films I've seen has actually been slasher made in 2008 called The Strangers. I did a little bit on it in my last video that slasher movies aren't dead, and it's essentially about Liv Tyler and her husband going they live they have a summer house, and her husband proposes to her. She says no. They're all depressed on the ride back to the house. Then the house is filled with celebratory items like wine and streamers, balloons, and everything that her husband thought she was going to say yes, obviously. So they're all depressed, and the husband drives off to get something, leaves Liv Tyler at the house, and then there's these weird people with masks looking in the windows. Eventually, it gets to the point where they're pounding on the windows. Items in the house start going missing, and it's just a very creepy experience. It's also terrifying at the same time because it feels real, like it could actually happen. But at the same time, it sort of makes you question your paranoia at first. So it's got a lot of power as a horror film to scare you in a lot of different ways. For that reason, I believe it's one of the most underrated horror films out there. So, yeah, The Strangers. So question number 11 says, do you like horror spoof movies? I do. I enjoyed the first few scary movies. I would say the first 3 were hilarious. 4 was kind of a letdown. I haven't seen 5 yet, and because of 4, I'm not too excited for it. But I did enjoy the first few scary movies or horror spoof movies. But I think my favorite horror spoof movie was actually one of the first big horror spoofs that was made by one of the prominent slasher horror directors of the 80s by the name of Wes Craven. Wes Craven, after making A Nightmare on Elm Street, he went on to make Scream in the 90s, knowing that people were kind of tired of the slasher formula by the 90s. So what he did is he just made a horror film that was half serious, half making fun of itself, and called it Scream. And most horror fans have seen it, but if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it, especially the first one. They're all good, but yeah, definitely see Scream if you haven't already. It's a very good horror spoof movie. My favorite horror movie series, although it isn't really scary, just for the nostalgia factor and for the fact that it's got a lot of creative kills, it's got a lot of dumb teenagers, it's just a classic horror film in a lot of different ways. It's got a great soundtrack. Is the Friday the 13th series. It's my favorite movie series because it's the longest running, and it's just very beloved by the fans. And although the stories got stupider and stupider, it was more about, and is still more about, the legacy behind the characters of Jason and the teenagers who go off and get drunk and have premarital sex and then get sliced apart. It's more about that formula and the legacy behind it than the actual story anymore. But that formula is a very strongly rooted in North American culture, and it's for that reason it's a classic. And I to this day I still enjoy the Friday the 13th series as a full series more than any other horror series I can think of. So that's the one for me. And the final question here, question number 13, says name 13 horror movies. All right. In no particular order, and I'm not naming them just because I like them necessarily. Although all the ones on this list I think I do like in one way or another. Number 1, Friday the 13th. Number 2, Nightmare on Elm Street. Number 3, Halloween. Number 4, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Number 5, Hellraiser. Number 6, Poltergeist. Number 7, The Exorcist. Number 8, Rosemary's Baby. Number 9, Child's Play. Number 10, Alien. Number 11, Predator. Number 12, The Hills Have Eyes. And finally, number 13, Last House on the Left. Yeah, actually, all of those I enjoy for different reasons. So I would highly recommend, if you haven't seen any of them, you check them out. So yeah, those are all the questions for the horror movie tag. And so yeah, until next time, Gorehounds, I will see you later.